education and the employment were already existing federal laws, so Arizona did not need to pass them. But they said, looking back on this, okay, regarding papers, please, this is perfectly legal. So yes, as long as it's during a lawful contact, you can be required to turn these over. And if you cannot provide these, then ultimately, they're going to take further actions ultimately against you. Other states pass similar laws as well. Criminal searches, stop and frisk. We talked about stop and frisk, right?
Yeah.
What was stop and frisk?
Is that a racial thing?
Go ahead.
Like if you're pulling over for speeding? Oh wait, no.
Yeah, that's different. What was stop and frisk? Where was this? It was in New York. New York had the stop and frisk policy. And how did this work exactly?
I don't think we actually talked about this in
Yeah, we
Okay,
didn't
then
talk
we'll
about
take this away. What about what about the Catholic confession?
That was the teacher that was pregnant?
Did we not talk about the triple murder?
No.
Okay, I guess we won't have that one. What other questions have you got?
Yeah.
Schoolhouse Rock was just the link that deals with the preamble to the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution. So take a look at that.
Virginia plan.
Before we get into chapter 2, let's finish off chapter 3. Is there anything else you need in chapter 3? Privileges and immunities was unemployment benefits.
And Social Security and
I don't think we talked about Social Security, but privileges and immunities dealt with unemployment. How did that work?
Oh yeah, it was the guy who moved from one state to the other.
What state did he move from and what state did he move
From
to?
North Carolina to Connecticut.
South Carolina to Connecticut, yeah. And what was his thing?
The unemployment benefits in Connecticut were a lot higher than they were in South Carolina.
Guy lost his job and qualified for unemployment benefits in South Carolina, so he ultimately moved up to Connecticut because his research said that the Connecticut unemployment benefits were significantly higher, highest in the nation, in fact. So he tried to apply for unemployment benefits on day one, and how did Connecticut react to this? They wanted to go no. Why?
They didn't want their tax money going to someone who wasn't
they didn't want everybody to go to Connecticut.
Yeah, the governor refused on this, and the governor said that if people realize or people think that in fact they can get unemployment benefits without having ever worked or paid into the Connecticut system, then in fact a lot of folks are going to come to Connecticut just for the unemployment benefits, and that's not fair to the Connecticutans. I'm sure you remember the term Connecticutans, right? Not fair to the Connecticutans. Ultimately, did the Supreme Court buy this? No, go ahead. Oh, it's going to be a bad test on Wednesday.
They said that they had to uphold it because they had the right to get unemployment and they lived there, so you have to.
Yeah, they didn't deem it.
They didn't strike it down. But why did they say specifically that they had to get the unemployment benefits?
Because it was offered to everybody else.
What right?
A privilege.
Right of travel.
I guess.
Right of travel. Yeah, they said in fact that privileges and immunities can be defined as the ability, this is an obscure provision, but it's there. The ability to petition government for redress of grievances, the right to be able to use the navigable waterways, the right to travel. And the court ultimately said that by declining these benefits, then guess what? You're denying someone the right to travel, and that is unconstitutional. Then I told you my story with unemployment, which I'm not going to put on camera. Do you have any other questions from this chapter? Make sure that you're good with commerce, because we spent a good chunk of time dealing with commerce and the examples. Ideology is out. Just to go back, and you had raised some questions before, since we're in chapter 3, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I remove this one now. Since we didn't deal with stop and frisk, that's out, but the crackdown with Arizona article is in there. Please view the fetus is in there as well. Do y'all remember that Oklahoma law? Go ahead.
Where they were making women watch the sonogram if you wanted to have an abortion. Like, it was mandatory that you watch and see your child.
They also in another law that said that they didn't have to disclose everything. That the doctors didn't have to disclose.
But they'd have to point out some essential parts.
Okay, now we're starting to mix the laws. So there's 2 laws. Let's take them one at a time. The first law that Oklahoma had was if you wanted to get an abortion, then you were going to have to look at the ultrasound. And the doctors, to your point, Nathan, were going to point out certain things. And obviously, what they pointed out would depend on the area, the time frame of the pregnancy when you actually went in to gain the abortion. Why was Oklahoma, do you think, doing this? Why did they say they were doing it, and then why do you think that they were doing it? Okay, so why would this rethink the abortion? Emotion. Some people actually argued that Oklahoma was guilt-tripping women. And I think I had used the analogy of picking up a kitten and it meowing in your hands for the first time. You may decide that you're not going to keep any of the kittens, but as soon as you pick up that one, it's going to tug at you a little bit. You're probably going to end up keeping it. Well, Oklahoma was basically saying, look at, they're saying, listen, they were saying that they wanted to give you information. They wanted you to see a picture of exactly what was going on because they felt like if you really had all of the facts and you could look at an image, then it would change your mind. So they were kind of guilt-tripping you. The other piece, though, is, I mean, if you really look on something like this, Oklahoma is a pro-life state, and this was an example of what concept that we talked about in the Constitution chapter. The idea that a state could kind of decide its own policy.
It was a state rights or something.
Yeah, there's a term for that.
Federalism.
Federalism, yeah, states are laboratories of democracy within the context of federalism, so they should have the right to be able to experiment. That's what we were talking about on this. What was the government's argument? Or pardon me, the people that challenged this case, what was their argument? Right to choose, and how is this being taken away?
Because
They're being forced.
They're being forced to look.
They're signing the contract.
They're being forced to look, and the thought is that the abortion case, the right, doesn't say anything about having to do any of these things that Oklahoma wanted. So with that in mind, they were basically saying, we're not really comfortable with this. The courts, did they uphold it or no?
No, they did, didn't they?
They struck it down. They said no on this one. What was the second law?
It was the doctors didn't have to disclose anything they didn't want. If the fetus had a disease, they might not tell you.
That's what it was. The second law basically said, now understand, the first one was if you specifically wanted to get an abortion, you were going to have to look at the ultrasound. The second law said that if you were just going in for normal checkups, doctors did not actually have to disclose all of the information. And basically what they were saying was, okay, we probably think that you would be more inclined to abort. And the irony is that people in all the classes were not necessarily completely against the first one, seeing the picture in order to gain information. But then when you put it into the context of the second law, people were like, wait a minute. If you're saying that you want to provide information and then you don't provide any information, which is what they're not doing in the second one, you could conceivably go in to your checkup and you wouldn't get information that there was a health issue with the fetus. You might not know until actually the fetus was born, which by that time it's going to be a little too late to really act on this. And both of these laws were ultimately struck down in Oklahoma. So it's a way to try and really what they were doing is trying to influence you to choose their way. So they were saying they weren't taking away your right to choose. They were just trying to inform you better. But the court felt like that this right to choose was being actually taken away.
Was it the Oklahoma Supreme Court or
It was Oklahoma. It was courts in Oklahoma that dealt with this. It never got to the federal Supreme Court. They just basically agreed. And going back, if you remember on this, the legislature passed this. The Oklahoma governor vetoed this, and then the Oklahoma legislature overruled the veto. So just kind of keep that in mind as you go forward with this. This was something that was immensely popular in Oklahoma, and the courts still ended up striking it down. Any other questions? So we got Please Be the Fetus. We dealt with the crackdown in Arizona. Just kind of jumping back and looking at some of these earlier articles, and just to make sure that you're clean on these. Social media, land grab, webcams, miscellaneous porn, not the president's call, assault on separation of powers, and X Factor. Now, we've covered a lot of these in the other videos that are already posted in there, but are there any of them that jump out to you that you got questions on?
What's not the president's
not the president's call was a quickie, and this was actually dealing with the war power. Who has the power to declare war? Only Congress. Congress has the power to declare war. What's the president's role? The president's job is basically going to be to run the war. Excuse me, so Congress declares it, and then once declared, the power goes to the president to be able to run it. And I think I had mentioned to you in this context that if you had 435 voting House members and 100 senators, they would be more likely to make the right decision as opposed to one person. They would make a better decision as opposed to one person on declaring war. However, I think I had also mentioned to you that when it comes to 435 voting House members and 100 senators, they would not be able to run a war as well as one single president, because the president, with guidance from the military, would be able to be more decisive. That was the trick on that. Anything else jump out on these?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Can I pass this to somebody real quick?
Okay.
Do we want me to leave it recording?
You know what? Push the stop.